It feels as if the more I talk about this, the more nonsense I feel the need to share. I'm not entirely sure of the value of these observations and aspirations of mine for the story that I would like to craft, but here I am. Last time I briefly mentioned Tolkien and would like to continue about those rules that I feel that some of the stories that I've read are constrained by rules that are in place to some extent in our world, and how, for me, if I'm creating a story in a completely different universe that has so many aspects that are just impossible in ours, and yet there are still these rules, these bindings in place that might not even be consciously put into the place, and yet they seemingly restrain the story and characters in ways that I don't find very enjoyable. This is an acquired taste, I would say, something that I've only started truly noticing recently. And again, I've mentioned this at the beginning of my previous one, but it obviously does not mean that I think that I'm capable of creating better stories than whoever I've mentioned in this video or any of my previous ones. Nothing that would come even close to the complexity and thoroughness with which these authors approached their worlds that they were able to create. That would be awfully presumptuous of me, and hopefully I do have at least that amount of self-reflection to admit that I'm just a random, not even an amateur, because I have yet to produce anything, finding faults with works far outside of my reach. So yes, I am aware. But back to my point, I really just want to have antagonists of both genders that when they attack the protagonist or other side characters or in any other way engage in antagonist work, and if the characters or the world is capable of retaliation, they then, the antagonists, suffer the exact same consequences regardless of said gender, so that they are not pardoned by even the setting itself that sometimes fails to even acknowledge that whatever the character committed was evil or against the rules that the world has set up. So, for my stories, even if the antagonist does not suffer the consequences, it should be clear by the reactions of the surroundings that whatever the antagonist did was in fact a work of a villain, and in no way could have been excused as some sort of trope that I have mentioned before: misunderstood villains, anti-heroes, controlled by an evil in hiding and thus not really responsible for their own actions. Those are the types of characters that I really don't want in my stories. I am tired of them. I read way too many stories where these types of characters were prominent, and I'm over them. I am genuinely struggling to even find in my, well, admittedly quite bad memory, a proper, real female villains, not just characters that are controlled by an evil man, or characters that have been good all along and are just making tough choices for the greater good. Stories are awfully full of just purely disposable, evil, no redeeming qualities antagonists, but they are unfortunately almost exclusively men. I am aware of the exceptions, I have mentioned them, but they are just so exceedingly rare that I feel that I would like to genuinely, with care, contribute some to the rather small pool of all types of female villains, if I am even able to create any sort of believable within the settings characters. This is definitely amongst one of my highest aspirations for stories and storytelling in general. I have mentioned another example, another great story that I do enjoy, I like, and I will most probably talk about it at some point in some of these videos, and that's William King's Terror Chronicles, which I think would have been one of the greatest opportunities to have some perfectly characterized and properly explained and developed female villains, since their arcs are, well, slightly like dark elves, but in the end, there is not a single female villain worth mentioning or at all in the entire 4 books long saga. The protagonist's sister unfortunately turns into a friend from being one of those that I've mentioned, someone controlled by an evil man and suffers absolutely no consequences for her actions, even though they were horrendous. And the supposedly evil empress turns out to just be an ambitious woman that again did some quite awful things, as all terarchs do, and yet she turned into a puppet and a prisoner in her own palace, manipulated by again another male villain, who is in turn controlled by some even more evil villains from the shadows. Managed to sneak an example in, and now I should really swap to Asterix for at least a while. We have the messengers Asterix and Idefix finally on their way to Cleopatra to deliver the message that the palace is under attack by Caesar and his soldiers. A row of soldiers are trying to stop Asterix while he is under the influence of the strengthening potion, which obviously turns out to be a very bad idea. Unfortunately, during the breakthrough, Asterix drops his flask where he keeps the strengthening potion, and that does not go unnoticed by the villain Amon. Even Numeromis is now under the influence of the potion because Obelix was struggling alone, and thus Panoramix offered him a sip to be able to help with the soldiers and the defense. Asterix is being chased by 2 Roman soldiers, but that's just a distraction from the main course, which is a kung fu style fight between Numeromis and his arch nemesis Amon. Now both under the influence of the strengthening potion that, for the sake of this movie, gave them quite interesting set of skills, like the aforementioned ability to perform kung fu metric style and speak in foreign languages. Numeromis cracks his finger, then his eyelids, and the fight is about to start when Nexus tries to sneak in a sneak attack with his kukri aimed at Numeromis' back, and unfortunately for him, Numeromis is under the influence of the potion and thus easily avoids the attack and brings down swift punishment upon his wannabe assailant. Then there is the Matrix scene where, as if Neo was fighting Agent Smith in the last scene, Numeromis is countering Amon with his one hand, although he only does have one. So then the fight turns from a fist fight to a game of rock, paper, and scissors, which Numeramis loses and thus is in for some thrashing by Amompopis, which ultimately leads to him laying in the dust while Amompopis is doing his little celebratory dance. Meanwhile, Asterix's strengthening potion wore off, and now he is stranded in the desert with no means of transportation and seemingly no way to deliver the message, while the two soldiers that are in hot pursuit almost caught up to him. He then spots a small stall that coincidentally has a cart with two horses parked right in front of it. He commissions it, and then a hot car chase scene ensues, even with another small joke snuck in, where Asterix lowers down one of many rods sticking out in front of him from the cart, and this one has a mirror at the end of it, thus simulating our side mirrors on car we use today. And this is where I'm going to stop for today. Most probably going to finish in the next video unless I get too stuck on my antagonist rambling and fail to properly get to Asterix, but I think I'm going to finish in the next one.